The man on the phone cleared his throat, and with 5 simple words, he pushed my entire world off a cliff. "The foreclosure process has begun," he said, his voice calm and distant, as if he were telling me about the weather. I almost laughed, thinking it was one of those prank calls. I pictured a teenager in a basement, giggling with his friends. So I told him he had the wrong number. I told him this house, my small, perfect house with the blue front door, was paid for. I owned it. Every brick, every window, every blade of grass in the tiny front yard was mine. The man, who said his name was Mr. Harrison from the bank, didn't argue. He just sighed softly. "Ma'am, I'm looking at a loan document for $200,000, taken out against your property 10 months ago. The signatories are Walter and Diane Cawthron, with a power of attorney from you." My breath caught in my throat. Walter and Diane Cawthron. My parents. The words didn't make sense together. My parents. Foreclosure. It felt like he was speaking a different language. My parents lived 3 states away, enjoying their retirement. They wouldn't do that. They couldn't. "My name is Joyce Cawthron. I am 38 years old, and I am a children's librarian. I don't live a fancy life. I don't own expensive cars or go on trips to faraway places. My joy is simple. It's the smell of old books, the quiet hum of my little neighborhood, and the peace I feel when I lock my blue front door at night. This house is my sanctuary. It took me 15 years of working 2 jobs, saving every single dollar I could, and eating cheap meals to afford it. It was the one thing in my life I had built all by myself, for myself. I remember the day I paid it off, 5 years ago. I held the deed in my hands, the paper crisp and important. Paid in full. 2 words that felt heavier and more beautiful than any love poem. I cried that day, right on my living room floor. I cried because for the first time, I felt truly safe. I had a place that was mine, a place no one could ever take from me. I thought of my childhood, moving from one rented apartment to another, always worried about the next rent check. This house was my promise to myself that those days were over forever. Now, Mr. Harrison's words were echoing in my head, trying to tear that promise apart. "That's impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "I never signed a power of attorney. I would never do that." I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ran to my small office and dug through my filing cabinet, my fingers fumbling with the folders. There it was. The deed. Safe and sound. I held it up as if Mr. Harrison could see it through the phone. "I have the deed right here. It's paid for. You've made a terrible mistake. Ms. Cawthron," he said, and I could hear the pity in his voice, which made me even angrier. "I can email you the documents we have on file." A moment later, an email popped up on my computer screen. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. I saw a loan application form. I saw the address of my house. And then, I saw the signature on the last page. It was my name, in my handwriting, but it looked wrong. It was shaky, a little too perfect, like someone had traced it carefully. A forgery. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. I scrolled to the top of the document, my eyes searching for the date the loan was taken. 10 months ago. My mind raced, trying to remember what was happening 10 months ago. What was so important? Then, an image flashed in my mind. White lace, a 3-tiered cake, and my sister, Chloe, smiling like a princess. Her wedding. The destination wedding in Hawaii that my parents insisted she have. The wedding they told me cost a small fortune. The wedding I couldn't afford to contribute much to. The memory made my stomach twist into a painful knot. I remember the phone calls leading up to it. My mother's voice, sweet at first, then turning sour. "Joyce, it's for your sister," she'd said. "This is the most important day of her life. We need to give her the best." I had explained that I was saving for my own retirement, that I didn't have thousands of dollars to spare. My father got on the line then. He called me selfish. He said I never cared about family, only about my little house and your dusty books. The conversation ended with him hanging up on me. With a growing sense of dread, I hung up on Mr. Harrison and dialed my mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Diane. Leave a message." Her voice was so cheerful, so normal. It was a lie. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. My hands were slick with sweat as I tried my sister Chloe's number. A cold, automated voice answered. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." They were gone. All of them. They had set a fire to my life and simply walked away. I sank to the floor, my phone slipping from my hand. The email with the forged signature glowed on the screen. They didn't just borrow money. They stole my home. They stole my future. They took the one thing that made me feel safe and sold it for a party. The hurt was so deep it felt like a physical wound. But as I sat there, surrounded by the silence of the house I was about to lose, the sorrow began to curdle into something else. It turned into a cold, hard stone in my chest. Rage. The bank gave me 30 days to pay back $200,000. 30 days to save my life. Or 30 days to plan a revenge they would never, ever see coming. What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you the most left you with nothing? If you want to see how I turn my pain into power, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss Chapter 2. I'd also love to know where in the world you're watching this from. Let me know in the comments below. You won't believe what the bank told me next. For a long time, I just sat on the cold wooden floor, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan of the old building sounded like it was crying with me. The anger I felt was a hot, burning fire in my chest, but I knew anger alone wouldn't save my home. I needed answers. My first move was to call the bank again. I had to make them understand this was a crime. When I got Mr. Harrison back on the line, I explained everything, my voice steady now, cold with purpose. I told him my signature was a fake. I told him my parents were missing. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him typing on his keyboard. "Ms. Cothran," he said slowly, "I understand this is a difficult situation, but our records show the loan was properly processed. The money, all $200,000, was wired to a savings account." He paused, and then he delivered the next blow. "The savings account, ma'am, is also in your name." I felt the floor drop out from under me all over again. Another account. In my name? How? It was like they had created a whole fake version of me. A ghost who was ruining my life. I hung up the phone, my mind spinning. How could they do this? My parents weren't master criminals. My father sold insurance and my mother was a homemaker. This was something out of a movie. I thought back to my childhood, trying to find a clue that they were capable of something so cruel. I remembered my 10th birthday. I had won the state spelling bee, and I was so proud. I came home with my trophy, but the house was full of balloons and cake. It wasn't for me. It was for Chloe, my sister, because she had been chosen to be the flower girl in a cousin's wedding. My trophy was put on a shelf in the hallway, while Chloe's flower girl dress was hung up in the living room like a piece of art. That was my whole life. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who got good grades and never asked for much. Chloe was the star, the one who was beautiful and charming and always needed something. A new dress, a new car, a perfect wedding. My parents saw her as a dream they had to make come true. And they saw me as the bank they could rob to pay for it. The thought made me sick. I realized I couldn't just sit here. I had to find something, any piece of evidence they left behind. I started tearing the house apart. I went through the closets, the guest room, and finally, the attic. In a dusty corner, behind old Christmas decorations, was a small box my mother had left here years ago. She said it was just old keepsakes. I never thought to look inside. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, there weren't any photos or old cards. There were papers. Official-looking papers. They were old loan applications, all denied. Letters from banks with angry red stamps that said, "Final notice." My parents weren't just enjoying their retirement. They were drowning in debt. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't just about giving Chloe a dream wedding. This was about saving themselves. They had used my name, my perfect credit, my beautiful home, to bail themselves out of a mess they had hidden from me my entire life. I knew then that I couldn't handle this alone. I found a lawyer online who specialized in fraud and called him, my voice barely a whisper as I explained the situation. He listened patiently, but his words offered little comfort. Proving forgery is very difficult, he said. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money, Ms. Cothran. Money you don't have. He told me the bank had the right to foreclose, and fighting them would be a long, painful battle in court. He said my best bet was to find my parents and get them to confess. Then he asked a question that chilled me to the bone. I'm looking at your father's public records, the lawyer said. Has he ever done business with a company called Phoenix Holdings? The name meant nothing to me. It's just, the lawyer continued, that I've seen that name pop up in other fraud cases. It's usually a bad sign. Another secret. Another lie. After the call, I felt more alone than ever. The law wouldn't save me. The bank wouldn't help me. My own family had betrayed me. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a dark ocean with no one to throw me a rope. For a moment, I let the sadness wash over me. But then, the anger returned, stronger than before. If no one was going to help me, then I would help myself. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just cry and give up. They were about to find out how wrong they were. On a desperate whim, I searched for my sister Chloe on social media. Her account was private, but her new husband, a man named Rick, had his wide open for the world to see. I scrolled through pictures of their fancy dinners and expensive gifts. And then I saw it. A photo posted just 3 days ago. It was Chloe and Rick on a boat, laughing, holding colorful drinks. The caption read, "Endless summer. Huge thanks to the best parents in the world for making this dream our reality." The rage burned so hot it felt like my skin was on fire. I was about to throw my phone across the room, but I stopped. I zoomed in on the photo. Behind their smiling, carefree faces, I saw something in the background. It was a building on the shoreline, a very unique, cone-shaped hotel I had seen once in a travel magazine. It wasn't in Hawaii. It wasn't anywhere in the United States. And next to it was a small boat with a name painted on the side. I couldn't make out the whole name, but I could see the first 4 letters. Mari. A quick search told me everything. I knew the hotel. I knew the city. They weren't just hiding. They had left the country. And I knew exactly where they had gone. Playa del Carmen, Mexico. The name of the city glowed on my computer screen, a paradise of white sand and turquoise water. It was a place for honeymoons and happy memories. For my family, it was a hiding place, bought with the ashes of my life. Seeing their smiling faces in that sunny paradise while I sat in my cold, darkening house made something inside me snap. The sadness was gone, replaced by a sharp, clear focus. I knew I couldn't fight them from here. I had to go there. I had to look them in the eyes. But how? I had less than $500 in my bank account. A plane ticket to Mexico might as well have been a ticket to the moon. My eyes scanned my living room, the one place that had always brought me peace. And then, I saw them. My books. Lining the walls were shelves filled with my most precious treasures, first edition copies of my favorite classics. I had spent years searching for them in old bookshops and at auctions. They were my children, my history, my quiet friends. The thought of selling them felt like a betrayal. It was like cutting off a piece of my own soul. But my house, my real home, was the body. And to save the body, sometimes you have to lose a limb. The next morning, I packed my beloved books into 3 large boxes. The owner of the city's only rare bookshop, Mr. Abernathy, was an old man with kind eyes who had known me since I was a girl. He looked at the books, then at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Joyce," he said softly, "these are your life's collection. Are you in some kind of trouble? I just shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I told him I needed the money, and I needed it today. He counted out the cash, his hands slow and sad. It was enough for a one-way ticket and a cheap hotel for a week. As I was about to leave, his hand on my arm stopped me. He looked at me with those knowing eyes. I knew your father a long time ago, Joyce. Walter was always chasing a big score, always looking for the easy way out. That path can lead a man to bad company. He slipped a small piece of paper into my hand. On it was a name, Matteo, and a phone number with a foreign country code. Matteo owes me a favor from long ago. If you find yourself in real trouble down there, the kind of trouble a librarian shouldn't be in, call him. Just be careful. The flight was a blur. I was a ghost in a metal tube, flying through the clouds. I was leaving behind everything I knew. My job, my friends, the very ground I stood on was being pulled from under me. I wasn't the same Joyce who organized children's story time and worried about overdue books. That person was gone. The woman on the plane was a hunter. I didn't have a plan, not a real one. I just knew I had to find them. I had to get a confession. It was the only way the lawyer said I could save my house. When I landed in Mexico, the heat hit me like a physical wall. The air was thick with the smell of salt and flowers, the sounds of music and loud chatter filling the streets. It was so alive, so different from my quiet little world. I found a small, cheap hostel a few miles away from the fancy resorts on the beach. It wasn't much, but it was a place to sleep. My first and only goal was to find the boat from the picture, the one with Maury on the side. I went straight to the main marina, the photo on my phone feeling like my only weapon. I walked the docks for hours, showing the blurry picture to anyone who would listen. Fishermen mending their nets, crewmen cleaning the big white yachts, vendors selling trinkets. Most of them just shook their heads. They saw 1,000 boats, 1,000,000 tourists. It was a hopeless task. The sun began to dip towards the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I felt a wave of despair. What was I doing here? I was a librarian, not a detective. I was about to turn back when an old fisherman squinted at my phone. "Ah, see," he grunted, pointing with a wrinkled finger. "The mariposa. The butterfly. She belongs to a rich American man. He and his family arrived a few months back." My heart leaped into my throat. I was close. I could feel it. "Where can I find him?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. The old man's expression darkened. He looked around before leaning in closer to me, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You must be careful, señorita. The man who owns that boat throws loud parties, but his friends are not friendly. They have eyes that do not smile." He told me the man was dangerous, that people who work at the marina knew not to ask questions. A cold dread crept up my spine. Was this connected to the mysterious Phoenix holdings the lawyer mentioned? My parents hadn't just run away from debt. They had run straight into the arms of something much worse. The fisherman told me the Mariposa was kept at a private pier at the far end of the bay, but that it went out for a cruise every evening at sunset. "You can see the pier from the public beach over there," he said, pointing. "If you have good eyes." I bought a cheap pair of binoculars from a souvenir stand and found a spot on the beach, hiding behind a cluster of palm trees. My heart pounded as I raised them to my eyes. And there it was. The Mariposa, gleaming white against the deep blue water. Just as the sun touched the horizon, people started to board. I saw my sister Chloe, laughing as Rick, her husband, helped her onto the deck. Then I saw my mother Diane, wearing a flowing sundress. But the man who came out of the cabin last, the man who greeted them with a wide smile and put a familiar arm around my mother's shoulders, was not my father. He was a complete stranger. And my father was nowhere in sight. The binoculars felt like they were glued to my eyes. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. A man I had never seen before had his arm around my mother. He was tall with dark, slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked rich and powerful. My mother, who had been married to my father for 40 years, was laughing at something he said, leaning into him like he was the center of the world. Chloe and her husband Rick were there too, raising their glasses in a toast. They looked like one big, happy family. But it was a lie. A nightmare. And the most important person was missing. Where was my father? I watched the boat, the Mariposa, until it was a tiny white speck on the dark water. A cold fear, different from the anger I'd felt before, started to creep into my heart. My father, Walter Cothran, was a weak man in many ways. He was a man who took the easy way out. But he loved my mother. I never once doubted that. He would never just let another man put his arms around her like that. Did they leave him behind? Or did something worse happen to him? My family hadn't just stolen my house. They were tangled up in something dark and dangerous, and I had a terrible feeling they had dragged my father down with them. My first plan, to march up to them and demand they confess, was now impossible. That new man, Lazaro as I would soon learn he was called, had men with him on the boat who looked like guards, not guests. A direct approach was stupid and dangerous. I needed to be smarter. I needed to get to one of them alone. My mother was with this new man. My father was gone. That left Chloe. My sister had always been the weakest link in our family, driven by shiny things and easy comforts. She was my way in. But first, I had to find her. I spent the next day in the enemy's world. I took a bus to the luxury resort district, a street filled with stores that had names I could barely pronounce. I felt completely out of place in my simple jeans and t-shirt, a ghost watching a life I could never imagine. Rich tourists drifted by in a haze of expensive perfume and laughter. I felt invisible, and I used it. I sat in a small cafe across the street from a row of designer boutiques, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours, and I watched. I was waiting for a spoiled princess to come shopping for new clothes. Just as the sun reached its peak and I was starting to lose hope, I saw her. Chloe. She walked out of a store, her arms loaded with colorful shopping bags, a triumphant smile on her face. Her husband Rick was with her, looking bored as he typed on his phone. My heart started beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't approach her with him there. I quickly paid for my coffee and followed them from a safe distance, hiding behind palm trees and newsstands, feeling like a spy in a cheap movie. They walked to a nearby beachside restaurant and took a table with a perfect view of the ocean. This was my chance. I watched them order drinks, and then, like a gift from fate, Rick's phone rang. He looked annoyed, stood up, and walked down the beach to get a better signal, his back to the restaurant. Chloe was alone. She was busy admiring a new silk scarf, holding it up to her neck, completely lost in her own reflection. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move. I had maybe 2 minutes. I walked through the restaurant, my footsteps silent on the sandy floor, and stood right in front of her table. She didn't notice me at first. I had to say her name. Chloe. Her head snapped up. Her eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed with a familiar look of annoyance. "Joyce," she hissed, looking around nervously. "What in the world are you doing here? Are you following us?" She said it like I was a crazy person, like I was the one who had destroyed a family. "I'm here for my house, Chloe," I said, my voice low and shaking with anger. "I'm here for the $200,000 you all stole from me." She rolled her eyes, the same way she did when we were children, and I told on her for breaking something. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she said, waving her hand as if to dismiss me. "Dad said he was handling it. It's just money." My blood ran cold. "Just money," I whispered. "It was my life." I leaned in closer, my hands gripping the back of a chair. "Where is he, Chloe? Where is Dad?" For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed her face. She looked away, towards the ocean. "Dad's gone," she said, her voice suddenly flat. "He got what he deserved. Now go home, Joyce. This is not your world." Rick was starting to walk back. My time was up. I had one last question. Who is the man on the boat with Mom? I demanded. A cruel little smile played on Chloe's lips. That's Lazaro, she said, her voice filled with admiration. He's a very powerful man. He takes care of us now, much better than Dad ever could. Rick reached the table and I melted back into the crowd of tourists, my sister's words stabbing me in the back. I stumbled back to my lonely hostel room, the walls feeling like they were closing in. He got what he deserved. What did that mean? What had my father done? And who was this Lazaro, who had replaced him so easily? I was in over my head, in a foreign country with no money and no one to turn to. I felt the slip of paper from Mr. Abernathy in my pocket, its edges soft and worn. I pulled it out and stared at the name. Matteo. It was my only hope, my last resort. With a hand that trembled so hard I could barely hold the phone, I dialed the number. I was no longer just fighting for my house. I was fighting for answers, and maybe, just maybe, for my father's life. My finger hovered over the call button, my thumb shaking. This was a call to a complete stranger in a dangerous world I knew nothing about. But what other choice did I have? I was out of time and out of options. I took a deep breath and pressed the screen. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up, thinking it was a dead number, a false hope. Then, a man answered. His voice was deep and calm, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Yes, he said, as if he were expecting a call. There was no surprise, no confusion. My name is Joyce Cothran, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Abernathy from the bookshop. He gave me this number. I could hear a faint smile in his voice. The old man with the dusty books. He called me yesterday. He said a librarian might be flying into a storm. Stay where you are. I will find you. Before I could ask how, he hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief. He didn't ask for my address. He just said he would find me. A new kind of fear, mixed with a tiny spark of hope, settled in my stomach. For the next 3 hours, I sat on the edge of my lumpy mattress in the tiny hostel room. Every footstep in the hallway, every car horn from the street below, made me jump. I felt like a mouse hiding from a cat, except I didn't know if the cat was coming to help me or to eat me. The sun went down, and the room grew dark. Just as I was convincing myself I had made a terrible mistake, there was a soft, firm knock on the door. Not loud or scary, just certain. I held my breath and opened it a crack. The man standing there was not what I expected. He wasn't a young, muscular, tough guy. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. He wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers. He could have been a college professor or a doctor. But his eyes were a different story. They were dark and intelligent, and they looked at me with an intensity that saw everything. "You are Joyce," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am Matteo. May I come in?" I let him in and he listened, his face unreadable, as I poured out the whole miserable story. The house, the loan, the forged signature, my sister's cruel words, and the strange man with my mother. When I finished, the only sound was a buzzing fan in the corner. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "This man you saw," he said, his voice quiet. "His name is Lazaro." The way he said the name sent a shiver down my spine. "He is not a good man. He is a coyote. Not for people, but for money. He helps powerful men wash their fortunes and disappear." My blood went cold. This was real. This was dangerous. Then Matteo asked another question, his eyes fixed on mine. "This life your father was chasing, did it ever involve a company called Phoenix Holdings?" The name was like a lightning strike, connecting the lawyer in America to this small, hot room in Mexico. I told him yes, that the lawyer had mentioned it. Matteo nodded slowly, a grim look on his face. "I thought so," he said. "Phoenix Holdings is one of Lazaro's companies. Your father did not just fall into this trouble, Joyce. He walked into the fire all by himself. I looked at him, my eyes pleading. Can you help me? I just need to know what happened to him. Matteo looked out the window for a long time. Mr. Abernathy once saved my daughter's life, he said finally. A debt is a debt. I will ask some questions. But you must do exactly as I say. Do not leave this room. Do not contact your family. Do not talk to anyone. Be a ghost. I will be back in 24 hours. His words were a lifeline, and I clung to them. As he opened the door to leave, he turned back to me, his expression serious. And Joyce, he said, his voice soft but firm, you must understand something. Your mother and your sister, they are living in a beautiful villa with Lazzaro. They are not his prisoners. In a situation like this, they would be his guests. It is a choice. Do not confuse the snakes in the grass with the person who was bitten. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with his chilling words. My mother and sister had chosen this. They had chosen a man like Lazzaro over my father. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I paced the small room, my mind racing with 1,000 terrible possibilities. Was my father a criminal? A victim? Both. Had he made a deal with Lazzaro that went wrong? The line between the family I thought I knew and the monsters they had become was gone. There was only a dark, confusing mess. I had come to Mexico to fight for my house, but now, I was trapped in a story that was so much bigger and scarier. Exactly 24 hours later, the same soft knock came at the door. It was Matteo. His face was grim, and he held a small, folded piece of paper in his hand. He didn't say a word. He just handed it to me. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. It was a photograph, printed from a security camera. It was grainy, but I could clearly see my father. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. 2 large, muscular men were on either side of him, pushing him towards a dark van. But it was the little white numbers in the corner of the photo that made my heart stop. The date on the timestamp was from 2 weeks before my sister's wedding. Before they ever stole my house. I stared at the black and white photo, my mind trying to make sense of the impossible. The date in the corner felt like a brand on my skin. 2 weeks before the wedding. 2 weeks before the money was stolen from my house. 2 weeks before my life was set on fire. It meant my father was already gone when the loan papers were signed. He didn't abandon me. He was taken. The story I had told myself, the one where my parents were a team in this betrayal, was a lie. And the truth was so much worse. I don't understand, I whispered, looking up at Matteo. If he was gone, then how? Matteo's face was grim. He sat down on the only other chair in the small room. My friends in the city tell a story, he began, his voice low. Your father, Walter, he made a deal with Lazzaro. He promised him a large investment through Phoenix Holdings. Money he did not have. The wedding was the deadline. When your father couldn't pay his debt, Lazzaro collected his collateral. He took your father. The air left my lungs. My father wasn't a master criminal. He was a fool who had gotten into a cage with a tiger and was shocked when it bit him. But the most painful question still hung in the air. The signatures, I said, my voice cracking. The loan for my house. Who did it? Matteo looked at me with pity in his sharp eyes, and he delivered the blow that shattered my heart into a million pieces. With your father gone, Lazzaro needed another way to get his money. He looked at your family, and he saw you. Your clean credit, your paid-for house. He saw an asset. He let the words sink in. He gave your mother and your sister a choice, Matteo continued, his voice cold and hard. He told them they could help him get the money he was owed. In return, he would give them a life of luxury, protection. If they refused, they would share your father's fate. I felt sick. My own mother. My own sister. They had been given a choice. Me or them. And they had chosen themselves. They chose the money, the parties, the beautiful villa. They threw me to the wolves to save their own skin. Did they hold the pen? I asked, the words tasting like poison. Did my own mother forge my name? Matteo shook his head slowly. It doesn't matter. Lazzaro has people for that. But they gave him your information. Your social security number, your bank details. They opened the door for him and showed him where the treasure was. They are just as guilty. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it felt like I was drowning. But then, another thought pushed its way through the pain. A tiny, desperate thought. My father, I asked, looking at Matteo. Is he still alive? Matteo hesitated. Lazzaro is a businessman. A cruel one, but still a businessman. He doesn't destroy an asset if it's still useful. Your father knows too much about his operations in the United States. Lazzaro is most likely keeping him somewhere as insurance. For now, I believe he is alive. Hearing those words changed everything. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about saving my father from the mess he had created. What do we do? I asked, a new strength in my voice. How do we fight a man like this? We cannot go to the police, Matteo said firmly. Lazzaro owns them. To hurt him, we need something he is afraid to lose. We need leverage. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Men like Lazzaro, who live in the shadows, have one great weakness: their secrets. Lazzaro keeps a record of everything. A black book, a ledger, with the names of his powerful American partners, the amounts they've laundered, the accounts they use. If that ledger were to find its way to the FBI, Lazzaro and all his friends would be ruined. He would lose everything. A wild, impossible idea began to form in my mind. We had to find that book. It was the key to everything. To saving my father, to getting my house back, to destroying the man who had ruined our lives. Where does he keep it? I asked. Matteo's face hardened. In the one place that is almost impossible to get into, he said. His private villa. It is a fortress, surrounded by high walls and filled with his guards. Getting inside as a guest is impossible unless you are a criminal just like him. My hopes sank. I was a librarian. How could I possibly get into a fortress? But, Matteo said, a small glint in his eye, once a month, Lazzaro hosts a huge party for all his powerful friends. The security is tight, but it's focused on the front gate, on the guests. They don't pay much attention to the people hired to serve the food and clean the floors. He looked at me, his expression deadly serious. I can get you inside that fortress, Joyce. Not as a guest. As a maid. You'll be invisible. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. You will have maybe 1 hour to find that book. But if you are caught, I cannot save you. You will disappear. Just like your father. I looked at Matteo, the face of a stranger who had become my only hope. The fear in my heart was a cold, heavy stone. I was a librarian. I organized story time for children and helped teenagers find books for their homework. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't a hero. But then I pictured my father, alone and terrified in some dark room. I pictured the foreclosure notice from the bank, the end of my entire world. The fear didn't go away, but something else grew stronger beside it: anger. A cold, hard anger that burned away the doubt. I'll do it, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Tell me what I need to do. The next 2 days were a blur. The party was the biggest social event of the season for the rich and powerful criminals of the coast, and Matteo knew everything about it. He gave me a simple grey maid's uniform that was a size too big, making me look even more invisible. He had a floor plan of Lazzaro's villa, sketched from memory by a builder who had once worked there. He pointed to a room on the 2nd floor. Lazzaro's office, he said. The brain of the snake. If the book is anywhere, it is there. He made me practice my new identity. I was Maria. I was from a small village. I spoke almost no English. My only job was to clean, keep my eyes on the floor, and be a ghost. On the night of the party, A warm wind blew in from the ocean, but I was ice-cold with fear. Matteo drove me to a service road behind the villa, hidden by thick jungle trees. The sound of a loud band and cheerful music drifted over the high walls. "They will not look at your face," Matteo said, his voice firm. "They will only see the uniform." He handed me a tiny, skin-colored earpiece. "I will be on the other end of this, listening. I cannot speak to you, but I will hear everything. You will not be alone." He looked at me one last time. "Be the ghost, Joyce." I joined a small group of other workers and was led through a back gate into the heart of the fortress. The difference between the two worlds was shocking. The staff hallways were plain and grey, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. But when I stepped into the main patio, my breath caught in my throat. It was a palace. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, a huge pool glowed with blue light, and hundreds of people in expensive clothes drank champagne and laughed. This was the paradise my life had paid for. The sight of it filled me with a rage that sharpened my focus. Then, across the pool I saw them. My mother and sister. They were draped in jewels and silk, standing next to Lazzaro, laughing as he charmed a group of men. My mother looked radiant, younger than she had in years. Chloe looked like the princess she had always wanted to be. They were not prisoners. They were queens in their new kingdom. The pain of it was a physical blow, but it was a pain I had to ignore. I had a job to do. My eyes found Lazzaro. He was smiling, but his eyes were like a shark's, lifeless and cold. I knew I was looking at pure evil. My chance came sooner than I expected. A supervisor, a stressed-looking woman with a clipboard, saw me standing near the kitchen. "You," she snapped, pointing at me. "Someone spilled red wine all over the carpet in the upstairs gallery. Go clean it. Now." My heart leaped. This was it. The upstairs. The second floor. The office. I grabbed a cleaning bucket, kept my eyes down, and nodded. I walked toward the grand, sweeping staircase, my legs shaking. Every step felt like a mile. I was leaving the noise and the light of the party behind, heading into the shadows. The upstairs hallway was long and quiet, the walls lined with expensive paintings. The music from the party below was just a soft, thumping beat. I felt as if I were in a different world. Using the map in my head, I found the door Matteo had described. It was made of a dark, heavy wood that looked ancient. This was the tiger's den. My hand trembled as I reached for the golden handle. I expected it to be locked, but as I turned it, the latch clicked open. For a terrifying second, I wondered if it was a trap. But I had no other choice. I slipped inside, closing the heavy door behind me, and the world went silent. The room was dark, except for the moonlight streaming through a large window. It smelled of rich leather, cigar smoke, and power. A huge desk stood like a king's throne in the middle of the room. This was where Lazzaro controlled his empire. My mission was clear: find the book. I moved quickly, my hands shaking as I opened the desk drawers. Nothing but papers and pens. I checked the bookshelves. Nothing but old, leather-bound books. Where would a man like him hide his most important secret? My eyes scanned the room, and then I saw it. A large, dark painting of a ship in a storm. It seemed out of place. I ran my fingers along the wall behind it and felt the cold, hard outline of a metal door. A safe. Of course. It would be in a safe. A wave of hopelessness washed over me. I would never guess the combination. I had failed. My time was running out. I had to get out of there. Defeated, I turned to leave. But as I passed the desk, my eye caught a small, silver picture frame. It was a photo of a young boy, about 7 years old, with Lazzaro's same cold eyes. Next to it was a small, ornate wooden box. Acting on an impulse I didn't understand, I opened it. Inside, there was no treasure, just a tiny white baby tooth. And underneath it, a small, folded piece of paper. I carefully unfolded it. Written in black ink was a string of 8 numbers. My heart stopped. It wasn't a phone number. It looked like a date. A birthday. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and heavy, coming right for the office door. The sound of the doorknob turning sent a jolt of pure terror through my body. There was no time to run, no place to hide. My mind went blank, and my body acted on its own. I dove, scrambling under the huge dark wood desk and curling myself into the smallest ball I could manage. I pulled my legs into the deep space where a chair should be, praying the shadows would swallow me whole. I held my breath, listening to my own heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. The heavy door swung open, and a pair of expensive polished leather shoes stepped into the room. It was him. It was Lazaro. He walked around the desk and sat down in the large leather chair, his legs just inches from where I was hiding. I could smell his cologne, a rich, spicy scent that made me feel sick. I was trapped. If he dropped a pen, if he stretched his legs, he would find me. I pressed my face against the rough carpet, trying not to make a sound. He picked up the phone on his desk and made a call, speaking in rapid, angry Spanish. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. He was furious with someone. The call was short. He slammed the phone down, let out a heavy sigh, and stood up. The leather shoes walked back across the room, and the door clicked shut. Silence. For a full minute, I didn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. But the thought of the ticking clock, of my one and only chance slipping away, forced me to act. I crawled out from under the desk, my entire body shaking. There was no more time for caution. I ran to the painting, pushed it aside, and faced the cold steel door of the safe. My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled as I typed in the 8 numbers from the piece of paper, the birthday of the little boy in the photograph. I held my breath and turned the thick, metal handle. With a soft but heavy click, the lock released. The door swung open. My eyes scanned the contents. There were stacks of American dollars, velvet bags filled with jewelry, and a passport with a name I didn't recognize. But my focus was on a single object lying on the top shelf. A simple, black book bound in smooth leather. The ledger. I grabbed it. It was heavier than it looked, thick with pages of secrets. I had it. This was the weapon that could free my father and burn Lazaro's empire to the ground. This was the key. I had what I came for. Now, I just had to get out of the tiger's den alive. I quickly shut the heavy safe door, spun the lock, and put the painting back in its place. The ledger was too big for a pocket, so I lifted the top of my loose-fitting uniform and tucked the book tightly against my stomach, pulling the gray fabric down over it. It made a strange, stiff bulge, but in the dim light, I prayed no one would notice. I crept to the office door and opened it just a crack. My heart sank. The hallway was no longer empty. 2 of Lazaro's guards, big men in black suits, were now standing at the top of the main staircase. My escape route was gone. Panic began to bubble up inside me, but I shoved it down. I forced myself to think of the floor plan Mateo had shown me. There was another way. A small service staircase, the one the staff used, at the far end of the hall. It was a longer route, through the private wing of the house, but it was my only chance. I moved like a shadow, hugging the wall, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble floor. I was halfway down the long corridor, my hopes starting to rise, when a bedroom door opened directly in my path. It was my mother. She was holding a half-empty glass of champagne, and her face, flushed with alcohol, went pale with shock when she saw me. We stood frozen for a second, 2 ghosts from different worlds. Her eyes, filled with fear, darted up and down, taking in my cheap maid's uniform. "Joyce," she hissed, her voice a terrified whisper. "What are you doing? You have to leave. You can't be here." There was no love in her voice, no concern for me. There was only the selfish fear that I would ruin her perfect new life. I tried to push past her, to get to the stairs, but she grabbed my arm. Her grip was like steel. "You will ruin everything for us," she whispered, her painted nails digging into my skin. In that moment, I saw her clearly for the first time. She was not a victim. She was a willing player in this evil game. I shoved her arm away with all my strength, and the sudden movement was too much. The heavy ledger, my only hope, slipped from under my uniform. It hit the marble floor with a loud, sickening thud. The sound echoed through the quiet hallway like a gunshot. The book lay there on the floor between us, a dark, terrible secret revealed. At that exact moment, one of the guards from the main staircase came around the corner, his head tilted, drawn by the sound of our voices. His eyes flickered from me to my mother, and then down to the black book on the floor. His expression changed. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, and his right hand slowly moved to rest on the handle of the gun holstered at his hip. The world stopped. The guard, the book, my mother. We were frozen in a triangle of fear and suspicion. The guard's name was Carlos, and his eyes were fixed on the black ledger lying on the marble floor. He didn't see a book. He saw something that was not supposed to be there. He slowly raised the small radio on his shoulder to his mouth. In that split second, I knew my life was over. They would take me to a room with no windows, and I would disappear, just like my father. The sound of my own breathing was deafening in my ears. Then, my mother did something I never could have predicted. She let out a loud, piercing laugh that echoed in the quiet hall. It was a fake, theatrical laugh, the kind you hear in a bad movie. She stumbled forward, a drunken queen in a diamond necklace, and kicked the book with the tip of her sparkling high heel. The ledger skittered across the polished floor, sliding perfectly under a large, ornate table against the wall. "Oh, Carlos," she slurred, her voice dripping with fake cheer. "You naughty man, you caught me. I was going to hide Lazaro's boring old address book. He's been ignoring me all night, so I thought I'd play a little game." The guard looked utterly confused. He was just a soldier, and this was Lazaro's woman. He didn't know what to do. My mother took advantage of his confusion. She looped her arm through his, pressing herself against him. "Come now, be a good boy and walk me back to the party. This silly maid can just clean up my mess," she said, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. As she pulled the guard away, back towards the music and the lights, she glanced over her shoulder at me. Her eyes were not drunk. They were clear, cold, and sharp as glass. They held a silent, urgent command. Run. It was not an act of motherly love. I understood that instantly. She wasn't saving me. She was saving herself. I was a problem, a ghost from her old life that could ruin her new one. She needed me gone. And I was happy to oblige. The second they turned the corner, I dove for the table, grabbed the ledger, and ran. I didn't look back. I found the service staircase and flew down the narrow, winding steps, my breath catching in my throat. Every shadow looked like a guard, every sound a coming alarm. I expected the whole villa to light up, sirens blaring, but there was nothing. The stairs ended in the kitchen, a world of shouting, steam, and clattering plates. It was chaos, but it was a perfect place to hide. I pulled my maid's cap down low and tried to melt into the crowd of rushing waiters and busy chefs. The back door, the one the staff used, was just ahead. Freedom was just a few feet away. But as I neared it, the stern supervisor with the clipboard appeared out of nowhere and grabbed my arm. "There you are," she snapped. "Where have you been? Did you fall into the wine stain?" I mumbled something about feeling sick, but my excuse was cut short by a sound in my earpiece. It wasn't Mateo's voice. It was the sound of dogs, big dogs, barking aggressively. It was a warning. Mateo couldn't speak to me, but he was letting me hear what was waiting outside the back door. Lazaro had guard dogs. That exit was a death trap. Trapped again. My eyes darted around the kitchen in a panic and landed on the loading bay. A large catering van was being loaded with trolleys of dirty dishes, its big metal door wide open. It was my only way out. While the supervisor was yelling at a waiter for dropping a tray, I slipped away. I moved towards the loading bay, my body hidden by the chaos. I saw my chance. As two men pushed a tall metal cart into the van, I slipped in right behind it, squeezing myself into a small space behind stacks of greasy serving trays. A moment later, the heavy door rolled down, and the world went completely black. The van smelled of stale champagne and old food. The engine rumbled to life. I was out of the villa. The drive was bumpy and seemed to last for hours. I sat in the darkness, clutching the ledger to my chest, every nerve on fire. Finally, the van stopped. I heard the sound of men's voices outside, speaking Spanish. The back door rolled up with a loud clang, and I was blinded by the bright lights of a warehouse. This was the catering company's depot. I was far from the villa, far from my hostel, in a part of the city I did not know. I had to get out of the van without being seen. But as I peeked through a gap in the trays, my blood ran cold. A sleek, black car had just pulled up across the street. 2 of Lazaro's guards got out. They must have discovered the ledger was missing. They must have known a temporary maid was the only person unaccounted for. They were walking towards the van driver, asking him questions. They hadn't seen me yet, but they were coming closer. They were going to search the van. I was cornered. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I had forgotten it was even there. I pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. It had 2 words. Stay still. Mateo. The guards were just feet away from finding me. I held my breath, my body frozen in the back of the dark, smelly van. The guards were just outside. I could hear their footsteps, the crunch of gravel under their shoes. My phone was a small, cold weight in my hand, the words "Stay still" glowing on the screen. It felt like the end of the world. One of the guards pulled on the handle of the van's roll-up door. It was locked from the outside, but it wouldn't take him long to force it open. This was it. I was caught. Then, in the distance, I heard a sound. A siren. It grew louder and louder, a piercing wail that cut through the night. The guards stopped. They looked at each other, their faces filled with annoyance. Whatever they were doing, they did not want the local police involved. I heard them say something angry in Spanish to the van driver, and then the sound of their car doors slamming. Tires squealed on the pavement as they sped away into the darkness, just as a police car with flashing blue and red lights drove slowly down the street. The police car didn't even stop. It just kept going. It was a ghost, a perfect diversion. It was Mateo. He had saved me. A moment later, a simple, old car pulled up behind the van. Mateo got out, opened the back of the truck, and helped me climb down. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice calm. I couldn't speak. I just pulled the black leather book from under my shirt and handed it to him. A look of grim satisfaction crossed his face. He took the ledger and placed it carefully in a briefcase. "Good," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You were very brave, Joyce. Now, the real war begins." The next few days were a blur. Mateo worked quickly. He told me he used a trusted contact at the American embassy to get the ledger into the right hands. The moment the FBI saw the names and account numbers inside, everything changed. It was no longer about a stolen house in a quiet American suburb. It was about an international criminal empire. Within hours, the Mexican Federal Police, the real police, not the ones Lazaro owned, stormed the villa. Lazaro was arrested at his own party, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. His empire, built on secrets and fear, was brought down by a librarian with a library card and a will of iron. Mateo found out what happened to my father. He was alive. The federal police found him locked in a small room in a warehouse by the docks. He was thin and weak, but he was safe. He was a victim of kidnapping, but he was also a criminal who had made a deal with the devil. He would have to face the consequences for his own bad choices, but his testimony against Lazaro and Phoenix Holdings would save him from a long time in prison. He was found, but he would never be the same. And my mother and sister? When the police raided the villa, they found them not in a state of fear, but in a state of panic, stuffing their diamond necklaces and designer clothes into suitcases. They weren't Lazaro's prisoners. They were his partners. They had chosen the money. They had chosen the life. They were arrested, too. They would be sent back to the United States to face charges of fraud for what they did to me. I thought I would feel happy, but I just felt empty. They were my family, and they were gone, lost in their own greed. A month later, I was home. The foreclosure notice was gone, the fraudulent loan erased from my name. The house was mine again, safe and sound. It was just as I had left it, but everything felt different. I was different. The quiet, timid woman who was afraid of her own shadow was gone. I had walked through fire, and I had not been burned. I had survived. The silence in my house was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. It was Mr. Abernathy, the old bookseller. He was smiling. Behind him, 2 young men were carrying 3 large boxes. "A friend of ours thought you might want these back," he said. They were my books. My first editions. My old friends, returned to me. Matteo had bought them all back. I cried then, for the first time since it all began. Not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude for the kindness of strangers. Inside the top box was a thick envelope with my name on it. It was from Matteo. Inside was a short letter and an official-looking document. The letter said that the American government gives rewards to people who provide information that leads to the recovery of stolen money from criminals like Lazzaro. The document was a bank statement. An account had been opened in my name. I looked at the balance at the bottom of the page, and I had to read it 3 times to believe it. $2 million. I sat on my porch, holding the statement in my hand, and I looked out at my small garden. The money was not the prize. The prize was my peace. The prize was my strength. The prize was knowing that I had faced the worst of my world and I had won. I knew exactly what I would do with the money. I would start a foundation, a place to help people just like me, victims of fraud who feel lost and alone. I would use my story to give them hope. My family tried to bury me, but they didn't know that I was a seed. Thank you for watching my story. If you believe that a single person can make a difference and that the light of justice can shine in the darkest of places, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a story of hope, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of revenge and redemption.